If today is your first time being here, just so you have an idea what we're all about, we are an AMA. So you can ask us anything. The questions that you ask are best put here. I'm going to post this link to our Slido. That's the best place to ask questions, because then we can have everybody upvote them and we can make sure that we are prioritizing the questions that most people are interested in hearing, and getting to those first in case we don't get to all of the questions today. And if there are follow-up questions directly related to what we're talking about, then you can go ahead and put those in the Zoom chat, or if there are resources that come up, we can post those as well. But yeah, we are just hoping to help people who are trying to make this career transition to become developers or whatever you're looking to do in the tech world. Try to make that transition a little bit easier for you, because Sam and I were both in that position not too long ago. I'm Braidy. I don't think I introduced my name. I am a full stack engineer at Nordstrom Trunk Club, and I went to a dev boot camp back in 2017. And I've actually been working at Trunk Club ever since. In the past year, mostly just doing front end focused work and then touching a little bit of our Ruby backend. And if anyone is able to stay until the end, that is when we will stop recording, invite people to come off mute, and we can have a little bit more of a more natural conversation at that point. I know I have to leave at 4 Central today, a little bit early, but my nephew's birthday party is a big deal. So that's enough for me. I will let Sam say a couple of words, and then we can start up the questions.
Hey everybody, I'm Sam, front-end engineer. I just started working at a startup called Strike, with a K, not a P. Some people might have misheard what I said before. Yeah, I have a longer intro. I just gave a talk about my journey at Free Code Camp, Oklahoma. So I'll post the link, and you can get a slightly longer version of my intro if you watch the video later. I'll post that in a minute. So yeah, I also went to Dev Bootcamp in 2013, and yeah, I've been doing mostly front end for the past 6 years or so. Started full stack and gravitated to the front end eventually. But let's get our guest to give an intro. Brian does many different things, so maybe talk about some of the different things that you do, and also how you became a developer evangelist. So I'm not, maybe even describe what that is. And because some people here might not know, like, that's even a path they can take, like after graduating boot camp. I myself's interested in it too, because I always think about, like, maybe I should try that out sometimes because it seems fun. But I don't even know how to like move into that direction from a normal, like doing normal like web development. So
yeah. So I dropped a link to a GitHub README post of, it actually talks about how I ended up making my transition from Florida to California, or San Francisco specifically. It also covers a couple other things I don't really mention in other places. But the Cliff Notes is I started programming the time of Dev Bootcamp, 2013. I was based in Florida, Tampa, Florida. Ended up just teaching myself in combination with getting a mentor through Block, which is a program that's no longer around. But essentially it eventually shifted into a boot camp, but I had a mentor I could talk to twice a week whenever I got stuck. And I would just go through a curriculum, like basically like Free Code Camp. Free Code Camp also came out around that time too as well. So like everything that everybody uses was like when I was learning how to code, which is quite beneficial because a lot of stuff was like it wasn't 20K. It was like only like 4K to do a boot camp back in the day, or something like crazy cheaper. But definitely the best looking README I've seen. Excellent. I guess in short, I started engineering in 2014 in Orlando as a junior dev, I guess if you want to call it. They didn't call me a junior dev; they just called me a developer. And did full stack Ruby on Rails. From there, I ended up making the transition to San Francisco after 10 months of that, mainly because I spent, like, as I was learning how to program, I would write a blog post every time I would learn something cool or new. And I did that intentionally because I learned that someone said, if you write a blog post, actually Scott Hanselman said this, if you write a blog post, you can always find like what you did the day before. It'll be so much easier if you just write it down. It also it's very helpful, especially when you start interviewing and people start asking you to explain concepts. Like if you spend your entire time always trying to explain it to yourself in a blog, then you're pretty much golden when it comes to like, hey, how does networking work? So I did that. And when it came time to interview for my first job, I was just like, they would ask me questions. And I'd be like, well, do you mind if I just pull up my blog post and I'll just, I'll read it to you? And they're like, yeah, that's totally fine. And they were totally happy for me to do that and explain what I liked about the projects I built, what was like the hardest part, like all those questions I had in blog form. So like to answer your question, Sam, I ended up making my way into DevRel is because I kept blogging over and over and over. And I just had like a repertoire of this content. And that's really what DevRel is. It's like being able to be an advocate for, and I always use the term advocate instead of evangelist. There's really no difference. People try to split hairs between like what it is, but I do less of like selling GitHub. By the way, I work at GitHub. If you ever heard of GitHub, if you haven't heard of GitHub, congratulations, you made it this far. You should definitely sign up for an account because it'll be helpful in your journey. But I work for GitHub as a developer advocate. I was the first developer advocate at GitHub 10 years in. GitHub's been around for 14 years at this point, 13, 14, and this month, it'll be 14 years. And I looked at my watch like it tells me the month, but it doesn't. It just tells me the time. But what I'm getting at is I eventually took a job, and actually, this is the beauty of this is I'm gonna have links for everything that all questions, answers. I probably have a link for it. That's part of DevRel as well. Is like I just have an answer written down because someone's gonna ask me how I got my job at GitHub, and I'm gonna have a video that I could point directly to of how I got my job at GitHub, where I spent an entire YouTube video explaining it. Same thing of how I made my switch from being a developer to a developer advocate. I have a video about that, which I can go into as well. But long story short, I made it to San Francisco because someone read my blog. They got funded a Series A company, and then they're like, hey, we've been reading your blog. Would you like to come work for us? I figured, oh, wow, cool. I'll get a free trip to San Francisco. I'll bomb the interview. It turns out I didn't bomb the interview. I ended up getting the job through like a couple of things of like serendipity. Like I was learning how to build APIs at the time as a junior engineer on the airplane on the way to San Francisco. And my question in the interview the next day was, can you build an API using Ruby on Rails? And I was like, oh yeah, I was pretty honest. I was like, I did this yesterday. Here's how I learned it. So like, it's just basically because I just had like a real interest in learning new things. But like, long story short, I ended up having a goal of giving a conference talk. And so I would do this, we did this thing, like we have like our engineering syncs. When I was in San Francisco, we'd all just meet on Monday, talk about what we're working on. It's like a longer sprint, not longer stand up, but like everybody sits down, we talk and talk about our problems, issues, wins. And then we started doing these sort of like brown bag lunches where someone would learn something and you would just teach it. And because I already had blog posts all the time that I was writing, I would just mention a blog post I wrote. And then that sort of evolved into, we'd have these like engineering happy hours after work where we could do like a meetup for the company and teach about like what problems we solved. And then that turned into, I'm going to start giving a conference talk. I wanted to give a conference talk. So I was like, hey, I already have the system set up. And then I gave a talk got accepted a talk in San Francisco on learning iOS because I was a web developer, but I learned Objective-C for the purpose of building an iOS app. I bare minimum build it. Swift came out that same year. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll learn Swift. And then that same year, only 3 months later, React Native came out. So that I learned React Native. So I learned all these three things in the course of a year. Mind you, I was not like senior engineer iOS or anything. I was just sort of just doing enough to build what I wanted to build. I gave a talk on just comparing the three. And that talk I just gave, I don't think it was a great talk, to be quite honest. You're more than welcome to go look for it. But I made a comparison of like Taylor Swift and Kanye West. Kanye West being React Native and Taylor Swift being Swift. And sort of how React Native sort of super like upseated Swift in that same year. And that was actually the same year that Kanye West went up to the was the VMAs or something, where he like said Beyonce had the best video. That was the same year. And I just made that was my talk. And like out of like a strings of serendipity and people I met at the conference, ended up sort of setting myself up to continually to give a version of that talk, but also future talks. And then also the point that Netlify, which is my last employer, hired me as a front-end engineer. Mind you, I had very little front-end experience. I just kind of knew how to write JavaScript because I was learning it and writing a blog post about JavaScript and learning Angular and React. And I would just write 500 words was my goal. And that's 2 tweets. So just keep that in mind. So 2 tweets worth of content as a blog post every day. And because I was hosting my site on Netlify, which is a front-end static site generator, well, so I don't want to pigeonhole them to what they are today, but basically it's a Jamstack powered platform for hosting websites and web apps. I was hosting my blog and my podcast, which is another goal I had, which is start a podcast. And they reached out to me. It's like, hey, we're looking to hire somebody with your skill set because we've been reading your blog. Would you like to interview? And that kind of like rounds up like the blogging every day, the getting interviews where I can just talk about my blog posts in the interview. I make the statement, I don't make it lightly, but I also make it lightly. I've actually never applied for a job my entire career. I've been doing this at this almost 7.5 years, 8 years. It's always been someone that reached out to me. And it's because I've just always done something that people can find me easily. Because it's easy to sort of learn. Sorry, I don't want to say it's easy to learn the concepts. It's not easy. It takes some hard work. But everybody gets to the point where you could also learn like JavaScript or Python or Ruby or whatnot. But what stands you out from the rest of the folks usually becomes something different. Like if you have an interest in animation, or if you had interest in performance or progressive web apps or whatever it is, whatever you like want to quote unquote specialize in, those are usually things that sort of help you stand out from the rest of the folks, because Dev Bootcamp got mentioned from both of the hosts, but like Dev Bootcamp's going to teach the same cohort, the same curriculum. And it's up to the people who went to the cohort to, one, learn that, but also like take it to the next level or have their own experiences and insights to provide. Because otherwise, I mean, I could interview every one of these people, every one of you, in this room for a job at GitHub. But I want to be, what I'm trying to get out of that conversation is like, how are you going to basically work with a team? Like, what do you bring in the team? Like, what are you going to teach me when you join? Because I guarantee you everyone here has something they learned that I don't know about, or they have another experience that they learned about that I haven't touched. Like I touch Vue and Svelte and all this other like cutting edge stuff. But like, if you spent one more week more than I did, it's pretty easy. You can just spend 2 weeks on it. And that's as much time. I've only spent 1 week on this stuff. Then you could come to me and be like, well, I mean, I did the interview, got the thing to work, but have you heard of Svelte? Or did you know you could do this really cool thing? And I'm like, yeah, please teach me. And if you could teach me something, then I want you on my team. It's going to be it's going to be a nicer experience rather than me always trying to give information to you and then feel drained at the end of the week. Like, I kind of want to learn from you as well. And I think there's always like once you get that past the point of like, I don't know enough, then you should start just building up your sort of war chest of information, whether it doesn't have to be a blog post. It could be TikTok videos if you really wanted to. But like, or if you have Obsidian or some other, or Roam or whatever, those massive note-taking apps, like just write notes. You don't have to share them publicly, but I think the practice is just actually writing it down. So that is roughly my introduction. Sam, your question about developer relations advocate, there's no, similar to like being a junior developer, there's no certificate or structure. I think if I could summarize developer relations, which encompasses advocacy and evangelism, my job really is, and I would say I don't write this down and don't like retweet what I'm saying, but my job really is to build other advocates. What I do, and whenever I go to an opportunity like this or to a meetup or a conference, I want to get you excited enough that you'll go write a blog post about what you just learned. So if I could pique your interest enough that you're like, hey, I'm going to go build something with this thing that Brian mentioned, or I'm going to go take notes using this tool that I mentioned, then you're now on the road to become an advocate. And then if I can make room for you to go do this stuff, and that's all I do at GitHub. GitHub, I'm the only advocate at GitHub that does what I do. I'm the only one that has a title at GitHub, which is very unique, and we can get into that. And it's because I always build a platform for other people to go stand on, and it makes it so much easier to scale. So like if we're talking about GitHub Actions or profile readmes or code spaces, I'm going to give you enough information that you can go run with it. And if no one's running with it, then I have to provide better information. So hopefully that, I'm happy to take a follow-up question to expound on that, but I don't want to seem like I'm rambling.
I got a couple questions before we get into the Slido. So you generate lots of content like YouTube, and you do podcasts and stuff. Do you get to do that? Like, does GitHub pay you to do that, or is that in addition to all that content in addition to like what you do for GitHub?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so I have a podcast. I've got 2.5 podcasts. I'll have a third one actually coming out this summer. I do a YouTube channel. I also manage GitHub's portion of GitHub's YouTube content. I also do conference talks. I do guest speaking. At this point, it's live streaming is the new conferences. The short answer is yes. GitHub pays me to just do stuff. GitHub doesn't tell me, my boss doesn't tell me, hey, I need you at 6 conferences next month. Or, hey, I need you to get on this podcast. Like my boss doesn't actually tell me to do anything. He basically just says, hey, actually not even him. Like I have a director. I don't really have a manager. So above manager is director. So like I don't really I'm a staff level, which means that I'm kind of like autonomous. It's kind of a level I've sort of kind of made my way to in the last year. But what I'm getting at is our SVP of product will have a roadmap of what features GitHub will be shipping and what features we'll be focusing on. And this is not marketing. This is actually like, hey, someone said this feature doesn't work in this use case. We're going to basically build out this thing, make it work. Some things that we've probably seen, it's like GitHub Actions is something that it gets brought up a lot. I'm not sure if anybody's touched it, but I have tons of content on it. Knowing that we're going to be focusing this part of the product in this way, I just go build a couple blog posts, do a couple videos, and I sort of just do whatever I want to get the word out. And I leverage my strengths. To answer your question, though, in a different angle too as well, like at Netlify, they paid me to do whatever I wanted as long as I kept shipping features. So if I wanted to go do a conference, they'd pay for my conferences and pay for my learning, books, like courses and stuff like that. I didn't actually become an advocate at Netlify until a year in. So I was full-time engineering and then switched over to doing advocacy full-time. So, which is funny because I was still an engineer part-time. I was still shipping features whenever we needed extra help. My experience is not the same as everybody else. So GitHub's a very unique company. There are companies that advocacy and evangelism looks like sales, to the point where like you do a meetup and then everybody has to fill out a form. That way that person can take it to their marketing manager. Like I don't talk to marketing at GitHub. We don't have a strong relationship with marketing. Marketing's really focused on like our enterprise product with GitHub. And it's something that if you ask any senior engineer or people who've been around, like GitHub and marketing has always been like a weird thing where we've been really leaning towards the word of mouth stuff and less on like, you're going to see Google AdWords that says like, have you tried GitHub Enterprise? Like you probably won't see that because that's not what we do. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, they pay me sometimes in an advocate role, and there are advocates who just get a bad role or a company that doesn't really understand the model that will force you into, I need you to write 2,500 words by next week on this subject. And it feels kind of like a slog. Like there are roles like that. I just happen to be in a position where I like the stuff I talk about, and I could do this, all day, every day.
Yeah, that's why I asked, because I'm excited about a lot of technology. So like I've often thought about like, I already do like developer advocacy. Like maybe I should get paid for it.
Yeah, I mean, just doing this fits an advocate role. Like Brady and you, Sam, hosting this event on a weekly basis. Like this is something that I would like. I have a team of folks who are actually growing our team. We just hired a program manager, so less technical but focused on organizing events like this. And community managers also fits in this realm. Having a platform to go say, hey, we have a new feature. Can we go tell the people, tell engineers about this feature? Well, if you were an advocate, Sam, I'd really quickly to say, hey, by the way, Junior Developer Happy Hour, here's our guest. If you haven't checked out, here's XYZ developer tool. Here's a free coupon to sign up for whatever. Like this is this is like gold for an advocate. Like if you walked into GitHub wanting to apply and he said, I have an event that I host every week, then that would actually be really interesting because you're already doing something in that realm. And I think actually, I didn't answer that question. To get an advocate role, you kind of already have to be doing it. And that's the easiest way to get the job is by giving a talk, writing a blog, like showing up on Twitter, hosting clubhouses or whatever the kids are doing these days. Like just doing the stuff naturally as an engineer. That's usually how folks usually transition into an advocate role.
Okay, sweet. Maybe I'll give it a shot in a year or two. And sorry, one more question before we get into the AMAs. I don't want to steal all the questions, but you just said stuff about coupons. Do you have any coupons you can give to the people here?
That is a good question. GitHub's a free product, so we give away the product pretty intensely for free.
What
I
about
used to
netlify?
have Netlify. That's also a pretty intense free tier too as well. I do encourage you to sign up. I used to have GitHub shop coupons, but I ran out of them. And it's been a while since I've been in the office for obvious reasons. If you follow, actually, how do I make this? So the answer is yes, I can get you a coupon today. Do I want to get a coupon for how many people in this room? 37? No. But if you write, let's just give you a challenge and say, if you write a dev.to post on GitHub Actions, so you got to learn it if you don't know what it is. I have tons of content out there. If you give me a dev.to post, or I'll take Hashnote as well, or I'll take your personal blog. No, actually, no. I want it on dev.to or Hashnote. I will figure out how to get you a coupon to the GitHub shop for at least $20, which will get you at least a shirt.
Awesome.
So, and you'll have to do all the follow-up on your own. You'll have to find out how to email me. But the work is on you. I can get you a coupon. You just have to do the work.
Can you drop a link when you get a chance for like how to get started with GitHub Actions? I tried to do a tutorial once on GitHub Actions and I got stuck on like the second step. Like the bot wouldn't like give me the next step on the PR.
Was that the Learning Lab?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so I have a workshop I just gave at Open Source 101. Literally, the repo is called Start Here.
What is Open Source 101?
Open Source 101 was a event put on by All Things Open, which is a massive open source conference hosted normally in Raleigh, but this was online. And it's as it sounds, it's introduction content for getting involved in open source. It just completed last week, but you could probably watch the videos in the next couple weeks.
Sweet, awesome. Yeah, all right, let's get started. I guess ask some questions, and Brady's gonna moderate for us the questions, and so she'll pose the questions to you, and so you don't need to look at the Slido.
Cool. And I just reposted, in case anyone just joined, the Slido link is the best place to ask questions. And I've got one here I can get started on. What type of companies would benefit most from having developer advocates?
Developer tools companies. So there is a misnomer of, there was a popular developer advocate who just stepped down and taking another engineering role. They had an advocacy role at Quicken Loans. Quicken Loans being a loan company, I would not work as an advocate at that company. I would not work as an advocate at CarMax or, you know, Ticketmaster. Like I would run from those jobs because those are the worst advocate roles. And I'm just saying this very frankly for the benefit of everybody who's interested. Do not take a role as an advocate or evangelist or community manager at a role that does not focus on developers. Because if you're not focused on developers at the top, then you're not going to be focused developers in your role. It's going to turn into a solution engineer, sales role, customer service, whatever. If the role is, I need you to log into this and you're a developer, like then I would take an advocate role there. And those are the companies that will benefit. So like Netlify, I need a developer to log into this to deploy a site to production. GitHub, I need you to log into this to ship your code using source control and Git. Like those are the roles and those are the places that usually benefit. And that's usually where you can do the best advocacy, where all you have to do is write a blog post, or all you have to do is show up on a podcast or guest or host your own podcast. You're going to enjoy that so much better because you can talk to developers about developer things. And you don't have to change your tone based on this situation, or if this is a CEO or a VP or whatever it is. Like developer tool companies are the best. And I say this because there is a community of developer relations and advocates that have conferences like DevRelCon and stuff like that. And it's always hit or miss on whether those jobs are good or not. And you can always tell with like the type of content people put out there, if it's like super watered down and bland and it has to be super like generic and go through like this. It's like this thing of you make a copy of a copy and then you take a copy of that and then that's what you have to ship to a conference. Like some companies need to, you have to do like professional training, speaking training, which is, it sounds exciting, but what it really does is like how it's like more like PR training where you have to like figure out how to speak in the company voice and tone. Like that would probably be super draining. I think startups, companies that are like around 50 employees, who are doing really cool things in sort of developer workflows and improving experiences and performance. Like that's going to be where I would love, because I get to learn something while I'm also there, but also become an expert at things like, I didn't know anything about, there was a question about something about EC2 and Kubernetes. Like I didn't know anything about that until I joined Netlify. And it's because Netlify was built on top of Kubernetes and Docker. And also like, I didn't know anything about Docker. The CTO of Netlify came from Docker. And I learned everything on the job as I was there. I became an expert in all these different realms, which, yeah, I would definitely pique your interest in something that feels like a developer role.
Awesome. And then this next question is wondering if you have to be a creative person in order to be a developer advocate.
No. Like, I guess define creative, I guess. Creative as in like, do you make cute Octocat characters, or creative as in like, are you a CSS whiz? Like those are all no, obviously no. Like if you look at Kelsey Hightower, he's like the original advocate for Kubernetes, now works at Google doing the same thing. Like I don't see that guy doing a bunch of CSS stuff. All I see him do is a bunch of like really cool cloud deployment stuff, all from the command line from a terminal. And I would say also creativity doesn't come. It's like it's not naturally given to somebody. I mean, perhaps you're spiritual and you believe that you could incept natural skill set just from osmosis from your parents or being in the right place. I think that's mostly true, but also you can become creative just by writing a blog post every day, because once you write 100 blog posts, you know what a bad one looks like. So then now you're one step above. Or if you didn't know anything about animation, or if you didn't know how to draw, if you drew every single day, you'd eventually get good at it and you'd eventually be creative. So like, if you want to be creative, by all means. If you're not creative, then there's still room for you, because I think part of DevRel2 is networking. Like I know Sam, I know you through all the Reactathon conferences. We always cross paths. Like, you know me from that. You were able to reach me out and like, oh yeah, Sam, I'll help you out. Like you could just creatively get in the room and network with the right people, because at the end of the day, my job is to make other advocates. So that's also not just junior developers to learn how to use GitHub in fancy different ways. It's also going this extremely senior and people who've been here forever and convincing them that perhaps you don't need a server to run on EC2 to get your Netlify site up and running. You can use the Jamstack technologies and I'll convince you on how to do it. in this like 3-step tutorial. So yeah, creativity is not a blocker. I think the only blocker would just be yourself, and also where you are today. So if you have not done anything DevRel related or developer relations or advocacy related, then like just try things out. And that's what I do. That's why I have a YouTube account, because I tried it out like 9 months ago. And I'm like, oh, I can do this. And that's why I have a TikTok account, because I tried it out. And I'm not consistent there or anything like that, but like I made a TikTok that people liked. At least 30 people did. So I don't know. I'm not sure if that's good in those numbers.
Okay, so this question's wondering, where do you recommend starting a blog? I've heard that Medium or dev.to, but could it be easier or better to start your own page?
Like build your blog from scratch? So my answer would be, it depends. So if you are, and sorry, I'm going to drop I just talked to Ali Spittle about, and you should definitely have Ali on here if you haven't. Happy to intro. Ali, she's one of the hosts for the Ladybugs podcast. She's an AWS Amplify developer advocate as well. This question came up in this video. So her answer is great. I have a different answer. But the answer is, it depends. So like if you're just learning, I do not recommend you build your own blog. Because what happens is when you're trying to build a boat while you're trying to sail it, you're never going to sail. You're going to spend way more time polishing things and fixing this and learning this thing and never writing blog posts. So if the goal is to write blog post, I would go use Hashnode, dev.to, use Twitter. Like Twitter is microblogging. A lot of people forget that that's what their original tagline was. Like write a blog or threads of like what you learn in Twitter. I don't know why people don't do that enough. I always feel like every time I do a thread, it always takes off. But microblog on Twitter, use a different platform, just put it somewhere. If your goal is to build a blog as like a technical test for yourself, then I would say do that. But I would not have expectations that you also write blog posts on the ship that you're trying to sail.
Can you speak more about crafting your voice for a blog tone of writing? Sorry, I'm
yeah.
There was more to the question, and I'm trying to read it all to make sure I read it out correctly. But it sounds like you already had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, I get this. So I used to do back in the day when we had boot camps were still open in San Francisco. I always would speak at a boot camp once a quarter, and this question comes up a lot. So like, if I wouldn't put too much thought into it, like you don't need a gimmick. Like you don't need to be. I'm going to be the person who does blog posts and always mentions spaghetti. Like I'm just saying a bad example because like folks do have bad examples. So let's just point that one out there. Like you don't have to shoehorn spaghetti into, because you're the spaghetti coder, which actually would be a funny title, because spaghetti code and how JavaScript works and stuff like that is actually look it up. It's a term. But if you were the spaghetti coder and you mentioned spaghetti every time you did a blog post, like that's a cool gimmick. But if no one's reading it, and I don't know who that you're doing that for, unless it's yourself, I'd say go for it. But if your goal is to have some sort of theme or topics or guides, I would also, if you're a junior developer and you're just looking to get started, like use the theme or the tone as a junior developer. Because I think one thing that always is missed, especially when you think of like things like super advanced topics like Kubernetes, people forget what it's like to be junior. And the best junior developers are you, because you're a junior developer. And the best people, the best content on any of those platforms or anywhere else blog are junior developer focused content. So like new early stage developer content, always the best. Like that's, if you want to be a developer advocate, that's the best content, because no one knows how to use your product. So if you do only beginner content that anybody can approach, then you're going to grow a huge adoption of this thing. And then you could start setting up yourself to doing so more advanced content. A lot of times what happens with developer advocates is they take a role and they get really deep in the weeds and super advanced, where the barrier of entry is like way up here and no one knows how to sign into the thing. So I would say if you're looking for a topic or tone or goal, whatever, I would do that. With that being said, like if you have to be creative, or you happen to have, like, you want to be the spaghetti coder, I would just lean into it. That's totally fine. But I would not make that. Basically what I'm getting at is I don't want you to be blocked because you don't have a creative URL or you don't have a creative title or creative theme. Like if the goal is to set up content and just put stuff out there, do that. Because I've got multiple blogs. I've got places I write stuff and all over the place. And I've got briandouglas.me, which that was my original technical blog. I've got bit.ly/code. That's where I put everything as a junior developer. I put everything there. It was hosted on Blogspot, which is no longer maintained. So I moved that to my own site where I built it myself. And that was great. But I just could not keep up with like cutting edge technologies and doing all design and systems and CSS and stuff like that. And I didn't want to get trapped into a place where I was going to start updating my blog from Ruby to React because that was what I was writing code in. I ended up just starting to write on dev.to instead. And I did that intentionally because there's no barrier, there's a low barrier of entry to write on dev.to. And then I've also been experimenting with like writing on the company blog too as well, because I find there's a different voice that I personally have been trying to learn, is trying to learn the corporate speak as well. So I do that intentionally because that's what I'm trying to grow and adopt. I will eventually start writing on bdougie.live again. But for the time being, like I'm just not writing on my personal blogs because I've been going, well, actually bdougie live is something I actually recreated. It's my new blog, but I haven't actually finished it. That's the other case in point. Like I could fix this thing in a weekend and I haven't done it because, time stuff comes up. And so now I have any blogs on this site. So I'm writing on dev.to instead.
And maybe that plays into some of the next part of this question that I didn't get to. It was, do you have any, can you talk to keep writing even on the slower days and maybe on the days when you're struggling to find something to talk about?
Yeah, I would say just don't write. I would say take a break. If it's a slower day, there's probably a reason for it. So it's okay not to, like, you're keeping yourself accountable by writing a blog. And I think it's fine if you take a day off. I think like mental health is important too as well. So pick a pace that's sustainable. So if it's not every day, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, but put it on your calendar, like a Google Calendar invite, and that's the day you write a blog post. And then up until that day, you just open up a gist or a markdown file and just throw a bunch of links and ideas. And if you open a pull request, this is something that a lot of people don't realize you could do. I did a whole other YouTube video on this in a certain sense, but the way I write my pull request, I write them using these like values, which is SCQA. So situation, complication, question, answer. And I found out from my second engineering manager, he's like, hey, when you open a pull request, like you kind of, there's not really no call to action. Like no one really knows what this code is. Like if you could you like start writing your pull request in a way that everybody can like get excited about it and like go and review it? Because like usually the biggest issue as a junior dev is getting people to review your code. So I would set it up where I set up the situation. It's like, hey, PM told me to make this feature. The complications like, hey, I got blocked here, but I blocked here or whether, or I had to like figure out how to sort of talk to this part of the site to this site or whatever. And then the question is like, how can I implement this feature? Answer is my code. So here's how I implemented it. And I would set up all my pull requests that way to the point where like I had no problem getting my pull requests reviewed. And then I would take those pull requests, like just the same body, and I would make a blog post out of it. And I would put that on the engineering blog. And if you just set up your pull request in a way like, or your issues, open an issue and you're like, hey, I don't know, this is a problem, situation, complication, question, answer. Even if the answer is wrong, I always provide an answer in my issues, because if you have an answer, even if it's wrong, someone will be enticed enough to be like, let me actually double check to see if Brian's right. And if he's wrong, here's the answer. And there's so many times I've done open source contributions in this manner where people just give me the answer and how to fix it, and I go get a contribution out of it. And it's just like, it's the difference of like, now, I don't know where everybody's at in their life, but like, imagine you're approaching your a person that you're looking to court. I use that word because I'm like, I don't know why I'm trying to be PC, but basically I'm looking to date somebody. I approached them, and like I could be like, hey, your shoes look nice. Do you want to come home with me? Like that's not going to work, right? Like you want to kind of set up the situation where they're interested in actually talking to you. So like, what is that? It's like set up the situation and say, hey, I'm here, I the first time in this bar. Are you like, what's your favorite thing to drink? Whatever. Like basically that's it. As an engineer, you got to convince people to actually be interested in what you're offering. So I do that in my blog posts. I do it in my PRs. So going back to your having a down day, I think was the original question. Like I would just always write your issues, your pull requests in a way that it could be a blog post. And for example, here's something I just wrote this week. And I wrote this intentionally because I want it to be a blog post. So actually, shout out to myself too as well. So this is I want to explain this real quick. So this is my bdougie live. My blog posts are GitHub issues, and I sent you the blog post. Apologies, it's not styled. Again, I don't do enough work on that site. But that same issue number 89, is my blog post. So I set up my GitHub repo that powers my blog as GitHub issues. All the blog posts are GitHub issues. So I wrote the issue because I solved a problem where I wanted to send notifications to my Discord whenever I go live on Twitch. I do live streaming every Tuesday and Fridays. And I solved this on stream. And because everybody who watches me on stream, they go to my issues and see, follow up and see what I'm working on. I ended up writing a blog post in an issue, which I have not polished completely, but I just threw a bunch of thoughts in what I fixed. And then I'll just polish it throughout the next week or so. But what I'm getting at is this is my SCQA live in action, where I'm just sort of like, hey, I had a problem. I wanted to send notification to Discord. I ended up using GitHub Actions to do it. Here's how I did it. Here's the code. And it's not fully fleshed out, but this is the beginning of a blog post right here.
And you're a content creating machine. Do you do anything else besides create content?
In 2020 and 2021 now. No. I always look for opportunities. I mentioned GitHub. I'm the only developer advocate at GitHub. And I've been the only one of two for the past 3 years I've been here. And it's because we've always scaled to the point where I always encourage other people to do it. So my GitHub action work on stream, I live stream a bunch of in front of 10 to 50 people, depending on what day it is. And those folks will then go and help me write some code together. So I was like, hey, Brian, you did it wrong. Or, hey, didn't know anything about integration testing. Here's a test. I'm like, oh, cool, thanks. Thanks for getting me started. Or I get other advocates to join me on the journey of learning how to do this. I always take my live streams as a place to sort of play around in the open, in public. I'll take those live streams, I'll create examples, and then I'll go do talks at conferences with those same examples. So this example will be a conference talk. And then I'll take those same conference talks and I'll create a YouTube video out of it. Or I'll create a workshop. I'll add it to my workshop, which I just shared. So I always have I'm not doing anything for nothing. Even this, the questions you ask me are questions in my mind that I'm going to write down, and I'll do a YouTube video based on it of hey, here's some questions junior developers ask me. And that way, if someone says, hey, do you have any advice for me as a junior developer? I'd be like, oh, here's a link. And that playlist I sent earlier has a junior developer AMA session that I recorded the questions from a similar session like this, and was like, hey, here are the answers. There you go. So I'm always looking to scale things, because the other thing is I work 9 to 5 at GitHub, and I do this intentionally. You can work whatever hours you want, but I've got 2 small kids. So I don't do code. I don't do blog posts on the weekends. I don't do after 5 o'clock. I try to stop. So because GitHub gives me time to do this during the day, I just sort of scale stuff and try stuff out all day, every day. But as far as other things that I do, I just got done playing Animal Crossing with my son for the first time in probably 3 or 4 months. We have a YouTube channel. So a lot of my sort of experience of YouTube came because he wanted to do a YouTube channel. So we did that. Yeah, I do a lot of cooking. I'll be making fettuccine burro tonight, which is Alfredo, but it's the more authentic version, which is butter and cheese and some pepper.
Can you drop the link for your YouTube channel with your kids?
I suppose. It's not high quality content, so just be aware. This is more of it. It's more of an opportunity for us to bond together. So there's a lot of dead air into this thing, but I learned how to edit videos through this YouTube channel.
Oh, nice. What do you use to edit the videos? Just the YouTube tools, or?
No,
You
no,
use
I
a
use
different program?
iMovie.
iMovie.
Yeah. And then I use Premiere as well if I have to do something that iMovie can't do. So I always start iMovie. But if I need to do something like sync audio or do some animation stuff, which I don't really do very well, I'll use Premiere for. And then the other thing that I've sort of learned in the last year is Fiverr. If I want to do an animation, like instead of me learn it, I'll go pay the $20 to get someone else to do it for me. And because I can do some light editing in CSS and also some SVGs, I'll just create the SVG for them, and then it's even cheaper because I give them all the assets, and then they make it all do whatever I need it to do. I don't do that very often, but it is a great way if you want to sort of up your blog or whatever. If you're not a designer, getting someone else to take a crack at designing, and then it's a great little, like, I would say if you want to build a blog, get a designer to design it first, and then that you growing is learning how to make that design into actual code.
So which container orchestration service should I learn and why? This is that Kubernetes question you
Yeah, I
had
saw
talked
that. I think
about.
that was
Yeah.
like the first question. My answer would be it doesn't matter. I would say, what job are you looking for and what are they using? I would learn that one. Because if you're just learning it for the sake of learning it, like orchestration is going to be something that there is not a use case that you'll need unless you're doing like Minecraft servers or something. Like, I don't know what junior developer is going to have a use case for orchestrating servers. And I'd also go out on a limb and say most companies are not going to hire junior developers managing their orchestration and cloud infrastructure. So you're more than welcome to learn it, but like that's probably not going to get you a backend role or even an SRE role. Usually SRE roles are usually people transitioning from primarily backend. So I say you can't go wrong Kubernetes. Also, I'd say Cloud Foundry, which is open source as well, does a lot of that for you. So I would say learn Cloud Foundry, which actually does the orchestration for you, and you don't have to do. It's like more like the Netlify, but for Kubernetes. I would learn that instead.
I used to work at Cloud Foundry.
Oh, nice.
And then out of the people you know, who has the most OG GitHub handle?
Out of the people I know, I guess the CEO of GitHub, his handle is Nat, which is NAT. And he got that like early. I just talked yesterday to one of the lead maintainers for WordPress. Her handle was Helen. Like, I think anybody who has like their name, one of our product managers for discussions, GitHub discussions, is Becca, BCCA. I think all those folks have pretty cool handles because it's their name and it's kind of hard to get. Yeah, maybe that answers the question.
For sure. Do you have any tutorials for Netlify or for Python? Oh, Netlify for Python from your suggestions.
Tutorials? Probably not. Netlify for Python, you probably want to use something like a Pelican or another static site generated project. The only problem is that it's not very popular in the Python community to use that. So not a lot of people who write Python are using Netlify, to be quite honest. So I don't want to send you down a rabbit hole of trying to learn Python and get it hosted on Netlify. I would say build a project you're looking to build and then go find out how to host it.
Yeah, you can also slide into Cassidy Williams' DM. Did she take over your role after you left, or is it the same position?
So they have a whole team. So when I was at Netlify,
Oh, okay.
I was a full stack. I was actually technically full stack engineer because I was touching the backend a little bit to solve my own problems. I actually came from a backend role. So I ended up moving to like a purely front end role eventually, and then to DevRel eventually. And then at the time I got my role from GitHub, which you're giving me very softball questions. Like, I just want to point out that you do have my attention and answers for whatever you're looking for to learn. So this is like, you could ask me some harder questions, but for Netlify, I was doing a lot. So when I left Netlify, they ended up hiring Sarah Drasner to lead DevRel. We had just hired a second DevRel person who I interviewed and hired, but I left it for GitHub. And no one asked this question, but why I left GitHub or Netlify. But I was employee number 3 at Netlify, and I left Netlify because I wanted to get paid more money. So in addition to that, my wife was 5 months pregnant, so I wanted to also get 5 months off paternal leave. So that's why I work at GitHub now. But Netlify replaced me with like 6 other people. So I was doing a ton of stuff, and they ended up hiring a bunch of other people to do that stuff.
Awesome. That worked out too. That was good timing. I remember you got into GitHub right before the acquisition. So,
yep.
Good timing.
This is kind of jumping back from this person is currently in a boot camp. They're wondering, how much time would you recommend a boot camp student devote to personal projects, reviews, and job hunts?
That's a good question. I can say what I did, and I was spending like a good extra 30 hours on top of my full 40-hour-a-week job of just learning. And that learning was also building the projects that my boot camp was teaching me. So I wasn't building any projects out of the boot camp. Now, past performance is not prediction for future growth. So like I do say that with a caveat, like my approach is not going to be the approach that gets you a job. But I will say one person who I've been mentoring a lot in the last year, who just took a job before he even graduated his boot camp, he was doing a lot, and he was also, so there's an approach that you could take. Like if you know what you're doing and you have comfort to build your own project while also learning the things, then I'd say like go, join an open source community, answer questions in their issues, like consume that, and then get free mentorship through open source. It's a whole thing that a lot of people don't take advantage of. But if you're just solely trying to learn the concepts, I just focus on that, to be quite honest. Getting a job, I know there's like the pressure's on after you finish your boot camp of like, oh, I got to get my job, got to do all this stuff. I would say you could do the job hunt just by showing up at events like this, networking, showing up, being in Discords, like becoming friends, writing blog posts, asking for feedback on the blog post you wrote from the people who wrote the code, like literally wrote the code. You can go directly to the React community. It's funny because like Dan Abramoff responded to one of my tweets. I've met Dan a couple times. I don't think he leads the React team, but he works on the React team. Tom Ochino leads the React team, but nobody knows who Tom is because he's not a public facing person. But so Dan responded to saying, I asked a question about React, and like he's accessible to answer questions. He's not as much as he used to be, but there are other people on the team as well that you can ask questions directly to and say, hey, I wrote a blog post on, actually, Sean Wang, who also used to work at Netlify. He wrote a blog post, and it's funny because I didn't know how junior Sean was until after like this year. I talked to him. He's like, oh yeah, I just started coding. But anyway, what I'm getting at is he wrote a blog post on React hooks, and he's like, hey, I'm going to go to the React team and ask questions to see if I got it right. And they ended up coaching him exactly what to put in the blog post and how to massage that into like make sense. And then he was a face of React hooks. This guy, this random person who writes code for another company is now the face of React hooks because the React team let him be that. And then he ended up speaking the entire year of like 2018 all around about React hooks because he learned it as an expert. So I guess I would say like think outside the box of like, don't think of how much time, because like, to be quite frank, like a lot of the stuff I do, like Sam asked about like, do I do anything besides make content? I don't actually work 8 hours a day. Like I work like 2 or 3, and I spend a lot of time like looking at emails, hanging out in Discord, live streaming on Twitch. I could do a lot of other stuff that's fun. And I do that intentionally because I kind of just put myself in a place where I can have those conversations and connect with folks.
Yeah, I did the same thing pretty much. I didn't apply for jobs and stuff. I just went to hackathons, went to meetups, and just did stuff like that. That's how I got most of my jobs too. Kind of similar to you.
Yeah, and I would say like to that caveat too as well, like tech is not fair. And I'm saying this like I just want to be very blunt too as well. Like there's a lot of issues in tech. There's a lot of like between like being a minority, being a female, being non-binary. Like there's nothing fair about getting a job in tech. Like there are folks like myself who got a job because I happen to know somebody at GitHub. So understand that the game is rigged, and also like understand that the game is rigged, but also understand how to play the game. So like if that is like rubbing you the wrong way, like continue applying for jobs and like do the thing and you'll eventually get there. But also understand if the game is rigged, like what can you do to be not a part of the problem, but also understand that the problem is against you. And that if you connections by going to meetups, hackathons, being in discords, hanging out with open source folks, like I mentioned, the person who just got a job, like what he did, he ended up contributing to the Redwood JS community. Redwood JS is like a relatively unknown, mostly, and most people don't know about it. People are trying to understand what Redwood JS is. It's like a full stack React framework, where it actually gives you conventions for other things like deployments and databases and functions, and it's all packaged into one. And he was just doing a tour of like, hey, there's all these new things coming out. I'm gonna just like kind of know enough to the point where he wrote a blog post on it, and then went to the team at Redwood and was like, hey, I wrote a blog post. Like, what do you think? He's like, it's good. And then he wrote a tutorial on how to get started with Redwood. And then they're like, oh, this is pretty good. Like, do you want to write this tutorial? He's like, yeah, I'll do this one. Mind you, the guy who created Redwood is the same guy who created GitHub. So he's the technical co-founder of GitHub, github.com. It blows me away that like folks don't understand that you could just go into these projects and meet the people who built the internet, like literally built everything we use, and just go have a chat with them. And they make themselves available because the guy who founded GitHub, he doesn't have time for me. Well, he technically does because I know him through, he's an investor at Netlify. And but anyway, what I'm getting at, and I work for GitHub, but what I'm getting at is that if you make yourself available and you like basically rub shoulders with people and you give them free help and say, hey, I'll help your documentation of your open source project, that guy who now has a job before he finishes boot camp now gets introduced to other companies who are like, you don't know who this guy is, but you know who I am. You need to interview him. And it just comes down to that. And like, I think if the unfairness of tech bothers you, be the connection for that people who have something to offer but are overlooked. Yes. Like I make myself like overly available. Like I answer DMs. I intro people to folks who need introductions. I've made it a point to folks who are underrepresented in the open source community. I've made it a place to get them sponsorship and like become faces in their realm. Because again, there's an unfairness thing. I have a lot of privilege because I work at a company that people have heard of. I also have a privilege because they pay me too much money. So like I do have the bandwidth to basically spend cycles on getting people in front of places. Now I say that with a caveat because like there's what 40, 30 people in here. I can't do that for everybody in this room, but I guarantee you maybe a handful of you will reach out to me after this. And it's just like it's the kind of the facts laid out there. Like I did a very similar event like this a couple weeks ago. And I think about maybe 3 or 4 people out of, I think 150 reach out to me. And those 3 or 4 people are just like, hey, just want to connect. I'll connect with you on LinkedIn, connect with you on Twitter, show up in my Discord. And like, they just showed up. Like I'm not expecting them to ask me questions because like eventually maybe they'll forget about me. Maybe they'll ask me for a favor. But then like, you just don't know until you ask. So like, it's just like I say it right now because I'm probably guarantee some of you will probably reach out to me because I said it. But if I didn't say this, very few of you were to reach out to me after and said, hey, great talk. I have a question about this, or I have another question, or I wanted to get an intro to this company because you have a connection. Like very few people do that.
Yeah, thanks for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. I think it's more scalable to do it like this. You do it in a whole group of people. That's kind of why we do this too, because I get DMs a lot too. Like I don't have time to video chat with every single person that asks me in the DM. It's easier to just do it as a group. So yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Cool. Moving on to this next question then. What's your favorite thing that you've done as a developer advocate?
That is a good question. Favorite thing I've done. So that's like asking your favorite kid, right? I think the favorite thing I've done is actually this pizza sitting right over my shoulder. A lot of what I do, I scale it. I don't do anything for nothing. So like I wanted to learn GraphQL back in 2017. And at the time, GraphQL was a preview and people were talking about it. And I was only writing React code, but I understood the concept of GraphQL. So I was trying to force myself into like figuring out how I can leverage GraphQL to learn it. Went to the first GraphQL summit, and then everything clicked. Also, GitHub had just announced their first GraphQL, actually the only open GraphQL API. Now there's plenty of them today, but GitHub was the first and the only for like probably 2 years. So I was like, oh, I know how to use GitHub. I have data on GitHub. And that was like the difference is like a lot of GraphQL tutorials, you start from zero. But with GitHub's GraphQL, you just log into your GitHub account and now you have data you can consume and test out and see how it works. So I basically took that idea, built this project called opensauce.pizza on top of the GraphQL API, which is basically a project to maintain your contributions. Basically, I wanted to basically maintain all the contributions I was making open source and just have them all in one place, but also stock open source projects because I didn't want to go in an issue and say, hey, I want to work on this and then not do anything for a week. I wanted to basically save that issue in a place which is open source. And then when I was ready, I'd go pop in there and be like, hey, I did all this work. I'm ready to work on this. So that's what open source was. It was like a dashboard on top of GitHub. And it's become something more than that. It's now become a community of folks who are just interested in doing open source for reasons I mentioned before, like the person who was in, the person who just got the job because of the Redwood.js community. So I say that because I didn't plan on that being a thing that become a brand that then become a pizza that's over my shoulder in my office. It was like sort of an idea that I wanted to solve. I created a brand for the project, which goes back to the blog, like topic theme, like should I create a project that's like fully on, like has a brand and an ethos around it? And it honestly, yes and no. Like I happened to buy the pizza TLD just came out. So I was like, oh, I need to buy a domain with pizza in it. And my idea was opensauce.pizza. So then when it came time to deploy this to Netlify and add a domain, I was like, oh, I already have this pizza domain. So I had like no pizza theme at all on the website, but I just happened to have a URL that said opensauce.pizza that I built on top of.
All just came together.
Yeah.
If you're interested in being a developer advocate, do most companies expect you to have a few years of experience of code? And like which skills would be helpful, or do you think that it wouldn't matter so much?
Hold on. I have an answer, but I have an example that I want to share this team, which will hopefully, the answer would be, it depends.
Our favorite answer.
Wait, because that is the answer to everything.
Yeah.
Didn't you say your first job in tech was developer advocate, right?
No, my first job was engineer.
Oh, engineer.
Yeah, I was full stack engineer at a company in Orlando. I took another full stack role in San Francisco. Then I took a front end / full stack role at Netlify. Netlify forced me into becoming developer advocate because I was already doing it. So there was a correlation between every time I spoke at a React conference and how many people signed up, that they said that, hey, if you could just do this full time, it would be much better for Netlify than for you to ship CSS. And I'd agreed because CSS I wasn't great at. So the question, so there's this team called the Relicans. It's New Relic. They hired this year. I just talked to Danny. So Moy Danny on GitHub and Twitter, Danny Ramus. He did his boot camp, started in March, Turing School, got his job. I guess the boot camp ended sometime in September or November or whatever. Got his job within weeks of ending his boot camp as a developer advocate. His role was actually developer relations engineer, or developer experience engineer, which developer experience engineers, it means that you're not working on newrelic.com, but you're working on projects to support talking about New Relic. So like similar to what I did with opensauce.pizza, like I built a whole project using the GraphQL API and then deployed it to Netlify. And then I would talk about that. So like, that's what the experience, what they expect you to do is build like sample apps. Basically what you're already doing in a bootcamp, building sample applications from tutorials, you're building that and then talking about the product when it makes sense. So like half the team are junior, extremely junior, new bootcamp grads. And it's because the manager really believes in the model of, I'm going to hire someone new who can talk to new people about our product, because he knows that he can't talk to new developers about why this is important, but he can hire a bunch of new developers and that can talk to those folks and tell them why it's important. So I also say that with a caveat, because there was a whole conversation about this yesterday on Twitter Spaces with Sarah Drasner, Angie Jones, James Q. Quick, a bunch of other DevRel people who just are kind of killing it in the space. And this conversation came up, so they have a different view on this. I don't agree with everything that was said there, because I think you could be a junior and be an advocate, but I'd say you have to know what you're advocating for. So if you're advocating for early stage developers, then that makes sense. If you're advocating for just all developers and trying to convince them to use Kubernetes, it might be a harder sell, because you're gonna have to learn really fast. So if you're cool with learning fast, then I think you'll be fine. And like learning fast is not a problem. Like that shouldn't be a blocker, like, because you're in a boot camp, so you're already learning fast. So if you already have an aptitude to learn in the boot camp, then you should be okay. If you're not, to be quite honest, all I do is fake it until I make it. So imposter syndrome is a real thing. Every day I'm like when I'm on stream and I'm like, oh man, I could have solved this like in silence with the lights off, but now I'm in front of people live coding and I'm stuck and I'm Googling Stack Overflow stuff. Like that's okay. And I've come to the terms that actually is okay for me. But being okay with that. Oh, sorry. I just got a text from my wife. We had a delivery at our place and we're not there right now. So someone's going to pick that up hopefully soon.
Do you know any companies like New Relic who are hiring like junior developer advocates?
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know too many. I know a lot of companies are hiring developer advocates.
Is there like any kind of like Twitter or website that like aggregates this kind of information?
Not really. And I think it's intentional, because most advocates get hired through word of mouth. Like half the Relicans that were hired, they were hired because that manager reached out to them directly, because he saw what they were doing already and was like, hey, you need to work at New Relic and don't say no until you interview. Which is, unfortunately, it's a sad truth that most of the time that this happens is most people will sell why they're not qualified for it. So he actually had to do some hard convincing to some of his teammates to saying like, no, you're actually doing great stuff. You should interview. And like, I'm the same. Like, I didn't think I could do DevRel. I was already doing it, but I didn't think it was like for me, until eventually I was just like, oh yeah, this kind of makes sense.
So kind of switching gears again, for the people who are doing career changes, do you have any suggestions on how to stay motivated while learning all of the new development topics and how to avoid burnout?
Yeah, I would say build a project. Because if you're learning a skill set or a tool just for the sake of learning it, it takes a special person to want to do that every single week or weekend or evening. But if you're building a project to solve a problem, like I did, which is I wanted to basically manage my open source contributions, I just built that. And I learned how to solve the problem as I built it. And it's the same thing you do in the job. You have to learn as you're building the problem. And I think what a lot of we struggle is like not having the concept of like, I need to solve a goal rather than I'm just going to learn and read books for the sake of reading books or reading blog posts. So like I would recommend, actually Chris Sean, who's on YouTube, who's a New Relican, did a video about this, of how this almost made him quit developer or being a developer or something like this. Cause he talks about it on his, actually, let me see if I can pull it up because it's a great example. Yeah, I don't know where the video is, but anyway, he was talking about basically he would just perpetually just learn stuff for the sake of it, but he never did anything with it. So the goal should always just be like, hey, I want to build a thing that talks to my phone or that turns off my light from some JavaScript app. Like I would build that over just read a bunch of blog posts.
Here, the question as it's written, can you speak to negotiating your position and rate with the company during the hiring process as someone who thinks outside the box?
I would think that so like I would say have your number in your head. I would say ask enough questions about what you think is a rate that you would be comfortable with, but also don't sorry, my wife is pinging me. I would say so like one thing I did and what the one thing I didn't do is when I first got my first developer job, they asked me what would be a comfortable salary for what I would need. I was working in sales and I just took the rate that I was already making with my bonus, which happened to be 62,000 a year. So mind you, this was in Florida, Clearwater, Florida, not a major market or anything like that, decent. And I basically said, I just want that. And that's what they gave me. Turns out in hindsight, that was like 13K less than everybody else. 20K less than everybody else. But, I learned eventually and I ended up taking a job in San Francisco. And there, everybody kind of got the same onboarding rate. It was like a company that just got Series A, which is like, that's when you start taking the company seriously. You start hiring, expanding. At that point, I took a 100K, actually it was 95K to work in San Francisco. So I don't know how many people are in San Francisco, but that's not a lot. It's a good salary, but it's not a great salary. I would say you definitely want more than that if you're going to start working in San Francisco. I guess I'll just leave it at that. But in hindsight, I was like, I was actually living pretty frugally. We ended up moving to Oakland, taking like living in an okay neighborhood. So it worked out for us. And then moving on, like I didn't negotiate anything at Netlify either. Actually, I did negotiate Netlify. I actually asked for 20K more and they gave it to me. But I guess what I'm getting at is like, the only way I was able to eventually break out of the cycle of just making just enough was just talking to people and asking them how much they made. And I think it's something that we just, again, tech is unfair and it's all about your network and experiences. So highly recommend everybody in this room, whoever has a job, who doesn't have a job, like start throwing numbers out in like the Slack room and stuff like that. So everybody's on the same page because it's a competition and you all should be, hopefully there could be a community and a network that you can all be out and looking out for each other. So throw out some numbers. And I think what helped me is in Orlando, we had a annual survey in the Slack room that would say, everybody tell us how much you're making. And then from that, everybody can make good judgments and estimations like what they should be asking for at their work. And it was just led by the Slack, whoever maintained the Slack admin. And that was super helpful. And then you have these other places like Levels at FYI and Glassdoor that's also helpful. But it doesn't really cover things like stock, like how much stock you should be asking for. So I would highly recommend, like, if you haven't done this for the happy hour, have a session where you actually talk about compensation packages, because eventually I'll get to the point, but before I took my job at GitHub, I made a friend from Netflix. He ended up taking a job at LinkedIn eventually, but now works at Microsoft. But he just had a really heart-to-heart conversation with me about like what he was making. And I was like, I think we were comfortable with each other that I was like, hey, this is what I make. I'm curious, like, is that good? He's like, no, that's not good. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, what can I do about it? He's like, started naming a bunch of companies, including GitHub, of places I can interview to get an offer and bring it back. And he warned me that once I started interviewing, that it'd be very hard to stay at the company making that little. And this was Netlify, making that little, because like once you get an offer that's bigger, then you're like, there's more out there. But because he told me how much he made and he told me his story of trajectory of how he got to where he was at, I was able to end up getting like a 50K raise to go to GitHub. And then I've been able to negotiate my salary as well since I've been at GitHub. So like if I put a number on it, we're all friends here. This is being recorded and probably show up somewhere publicly where you can clip. I guess if I just threw a number on it, I'm getting paid almost 90K more than my first offer at GitHub. And it's because I just sort of put myself in a position where I had reviews and did enough work. And as I scaled my job, I was like, this is what I think I should be making. And it was like an easy answer it was basically an easy, okay, yeah, we'll make it work. And that's a huge bump because that's more than I was making. That was almost as much as I was making in my first job in San Francisco. I'm now making more than that from my first offer from GitHub. Mind you, also I
It's
did
a-
get a promotion too as well to help bump that.
It is a gamble though, because your equity from netlify could go to the moon, because netlify does have a lot of
Yeah.
traction. So it is a gamble.
In hindsight, like nowadays, like it's a great, I got netlify stock, so I know that's going to be worth something now. But when I left netlify, I didn't know any of that. Actually, I kind of did, because we were actually pretty much killing it. Like the same way they're basically have such great adoption. We had that same thing when I was leaving. I left for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Needed time off, wanted to get paid more, and have a job that I didn't have to be doing every job, 6 people's jobs. But when you go to a startup, I would not bank on this startup being the next Netlify or the next GitHub or the next anything. I would go into it saying, I need to make enough that if this company does not sell or IPO, that I could still afford to live and afford to feed my family. Because I think a lot of people will give you the mirage of like, you justify less money and more equity for exposure and fun and excitement. Fun and excitement means stress and lots of therapy. So like I would go into it with that mindset. Like you're going to work a lot of hours, even if the matter what they say. Because I've heard companies tell me, oh, we're all adults here. This is our 3rd startup and whatever. Like we're not going to overwork you. They will. They will eventually, because everybody needs to make money. Everybody wants to get the next round of funding. Everybody wants to, be the next biggest and ramp it up because all VC backed and funded. But like, I would not sell your soul or justify lack of sleep for opportunity and less salary. You have to get it somewhere.
I'm impressed that Netlify did end up hiring multiple people to backfill you. I know like some places will 6 people. You could have maybe negotiated 6 times what you were making.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like I think you have to also think about like the inflection point that when I came, like we were just adopting. So like your investment's always going to double. So like investment being how many people sign up, adoption, like my impact. Like I had to convince people to not use other platforms and use Netlify. The people who work at Netlify now, they don't have to do convincing. Like it's kind of like a known thing. Oh yeah, Netlify, they're a known brand.
A little bit though. Now they have fierce competition with Vercel. that wasn't your competition when you were there, right?
They actually were.
They were.
Yeah, so like Netlify, their bread and butter is the dashboard and the connection to GitHub. Vercel didn't do that actually Vercel has Zeit at the time is what they were called. They didn't do that at all. They were very focused on the CLI. And I didn't mention this, but I was getting my MBA when I learned how to code. I have a finance background. I was doing sales, getting my MBA. I had an idea for an app, ended up building it, learning how to code. And so like I have a business sense. So I actually had a lot more I was bringing to the table for Netlify, where like my job was to build a dashboard, like that front end dashboard you see when you log into Netlify. And we could have made a decision because Netlify had a CLI, and we could have just had feature parity of Zeit, now Vercel, whatever you want to call it, and we could have just competed head to head with them. But instead, what we did is we focus on the UI and the logged in experience instead. Because what happens with a CLI in like the business sense of it, a CLI, you use it and you never think about it ever again because it just works. So if you want to monetize that and get people to sign up entire teams, you can't sell a CLI. So we sold the dashboard. And because we took an approach of not going towards JavaScript developers who love doing CLIs, instead we went towards WordPress developers who didn't want to do WordPress, and large organizations like Under Armour. Like we ended up approaching that conversation, which the adoption is way different because you're not convincing a bunch of JavaScript developers who won't pay money to use a CLI. You're talking to entire enterprises. And that's what really kind of made Netlify supersede. So like, I'll say this very bluntly, like I don't think Vercel is actually competing with Netlify today. I think on the surface it looks like that. I think Vercel is actually catching up. And I say that because I've interviewed and talked to their CEO, and they've also like, I say this with a lot of hubris, but I don't mean to be very blunt and like I've made it and I know what I'm talking about, but I've interviewed for all these companies. Like they all reach out to me. And like I see what their runway looks like. And I see like Vercel was a non-funded company who took funding, and now they've changed quite a bit. So I say that because at the end of the day, I put a lot of work and a lot of sweat and a lot of effort into that position because I just was excited and happy to do it. I was young, had young kids. And once that sort of like fizzled away, when I realized, hey, I don't have a retirement account and I'm 30, I can't bank on Netlify getting bought by Microsoft or some other or IPO. I should probably get a job that pays the bills. So that's where I sort of hit. So if you have no dependents, you could take bigger chances than I can to probably perpetuate that 4-year vesting cycle. But I hit the limit at that.
Yeah, I was in a similar situation. I had zero retirement savings until I was like 35 or something.
Yeah.
And then I actually, when I went from Pivotal Cloud Foundry to Lyft, my total compensation went up over 100,000 more than I was making at Pivotal. So I left. I didn't even think about it. Like I was only at Pivotal for 8 months, but like you said, I needed some cushion, like to be able to know that like in the future I'll be able to retire. So, and I saved up a bunch of money, and now I took a lower paying job because I live in Tulsa. My living expenses are less, and I have a cushion now. So I actually negotiated my salary lower to get more equity because now I can take a bigger chance, and I'm bullish on the company. So
yeah, and I would say that
lowered the salary to like increase the equity a lot more than what they offer.
And that's why I would honestly say like having a conversation about salary, equity, regional based hiring and remote work, like that's like the future right now. Understanding all that kind of helps with the negotiation question, because companies will pay as little as they can to get you to work for them. And they'll try to keep you as long as they can by giving you magical stock paper. And I say it magical because like there's no guarantee even today that Netlify will.
Yeah.
I know their valuation, and they're doing very well. So like I've made more than my missed out salary that I missed out for the 2 years I worked there. I've over like more than doubled what I missed out on. So just knowing that in hindsight, I'm well okay with that gamble. But again, past performance is not future prediction for growth as well. So like my story, your story is not like that's not going to guarantee everybody else can do the same stuff. I would say just like make sure that like Maslow hierarchy of needs, like make sure that you're fed first, so that way you can do the next thing. So if you can't pay the bills, you can't take chances. Like you got to be able to be in a position that you can actually make rent. Once you can make rent, then maybe start thinking about savings or retirement or whatever, and then start thinking about like where you're at in Tulsa too as well. Like, I mean, I don't live in Oklahoma, but I'm pretty sure it's like well below anything that I have in Oakland for sure. But yeah, take that gamble, take the remote job if you can swing it, and yeah,
everything's dirt cheap here. But thanks for joining us on this Saturday. I know you're like super busy with all the stuff you're creating, so it was awesome that you were able to join us. That was a really great advice.
Definitely a different. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, if anybody's interested, I have a YouTube account. I think I posted it quite a few times. If y'all can like and subscribe all that content, that'd be super helpful. There's a lot of content that's specifically on just growing your career that I'm just trying to give out for free in a place that I don't have to always have like the Zoom call about that stuff. We can talk about other stuff if you do want to have like a one-on-one.